Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Today we have a talk by Hannah Rose. I suppose actually you will probably give a better introduction of yourself than I will, but um, yeah. Do you just want to jump in now?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey,
Sick.
hey. So I'm Hannah Rose, and I've got a little talk today about making tiny games, the things they can do for you, the things you can do to make them, and inevitably the ways you can even sometimes make some money because of it, because of job stuff. But just to introduce myself, because this is something you do at the start of any talk you've seen in the games industry, apparently, is you have to boast about yourself a bit at the start. So I'm a freelance Unity programmer. I've been in the games industry for like a year and a bit. I've worked on 4 different games, of which I can only ever get one screenshot shown because all the others are NDA'd or cancelled or surrounded by really awkward games industry drama. Uh, Best known for having worked on drama, for having worked on Dark Side Detective 2, which is a neat game that will be coming out soon, and apparently for having worked on a Roblox game that's been played by 90,000 people and 30% of them left a thumbs up, the other 70% didn't. They're entirely right, it's a terrible game. And I'm going to be talking about tiny games. So, tiny games are something. This is like a lot of kind of independent game making stuff. It's an informal thing. This is the term I use to refer to games that are tiny, that are sometimes games, but I think the core part of what I'm talking about is games that are made in one sitting. So a game that you sit down, you start making it, and before you ever leave, before you ever context switch fully, the game is finished, it's out there, and you never touch it again. So to elaborate on that a bit further, it ties in very neatly to the concept of a game jam. Game jams being where you have a often very short amount of time to make a game, and you try and make something nice and quick. Game jams are very popular for prototyping, and if you ever go to like Global Game Jam or something, they'll sing the praises of game jams and how Surgeon Simulator, a very successful game, and Superhot, another very successful game, were both games originally made for game jams. You'll hear about how studios like Bossa Studios, the ones who made Surgeon Simulator, will often have like internal company game jams in order to work out prototypes very quickly, very safely. The big benefit of game jams being that you can make a prototype, and if it's garbage, which many are, you can throw it away very quickly because it's a short amount of time invested. It lets you iterate over ideas very quickly. However, game jams also lead to the big scary question of, oh no, is working full out, absolutely full out, 14 hours a day for 2 days straight actually just crunch? And these two things about corporations running game jams and crunching yourself for it. This is where I want to like draw a distinction in what I'm talking about, because there's often like there's a duality to game jams. You get game jams where you're trying to make something that will make you money. I believe is the best way of like differentiating them, and those where you don't. Because even if you're working on your own and you are doing a game jam such that you can make a game that you will fully own yourself, but if you're trying to sell it, it is very easy to crunch yourself and to get all the awful aspects of crunch inflicted on yourself. You can burn out very easily. How like I've worked at several companies that when I tell them I do game jams, they tell me, please, if you are going to do one, book a day's holiday after the game jam ends for recovery time, just so that I don't end up crunching myself. But yeah, what a tiny game's not. They're generally not always that much fun. So this here, I have a screenshot of a game I made where there's literally nothing you can do to interact with the game. That's by design. It's not because I'm some deep, long-suffering artsy soul. I am, but that's not the reason it has no mechanics. The reason it has no mechanics is because you can go into a tiny game and think, you know what? I'm going to make something unfun. I'm going to make a game where you can't play it. This is a game where literally all you do is you watch a car drive, and from time to time, 27 coins will flip, and if they all land on tails, you die. The odds of it happening are astronomically small. No one will ever see it happen. That's video games. But there is a death animation. It's fun. Tiny games are often not what you were intending to make when you sat down. I have here another screenshot. I'm going to be using a lot of my own references because I always feel weird about asking other people to put their games in my talks. But here's a game where you dance with a pan. There is music that plays in the background, and if you press space, you can flip the omelette. That's the only way you can interact with the game. I did have plans for many things beyond this, but then I got too interested in drawing a little dance with a pan animation and forgot to make the rest of the game before I decided to finish it. I'm very happy that happened, but it's by no means what I intended to make. So what are tiny games? As I said before, tiny games are tiny. They're often incredibly silly, and I think one of the bits that's most important to me is that they're often more fun to make than they are to play. I like from time to time with some of my friends just popping into a Discord call and we all just make stupid things at the same time. And I've got, like in my little right corner here, a screenshot of one of my favourites, which is a game where you just had to click on a little egg. You could tell it was an egg because it was yellow and it had the letter E on it. And the instructions for the game was you get a point each time you click on the egg. The game sometimes crashes, I don't know why. The moment it crashes, you lose. Refresh. I've got here just another bunch of other examples of things. There's games where you can just... Here's a game where you just have a game playing in the background, but there's a cat chasing your computer mouse and making it hard for you to play. Here's a game where it's a battle royale, but everyone's a lotto ball and you just want to get out first. You can make all kinds of silly, meaningless, whatever ideas. You happen to just want an excuse to get down on paper. So, how do you make these games good? Because I'm talking about games where you'll usually have like maximum 4 hours because one human shouldn't sit in one place for that long. One human should go eat from time to time. We're talking about games where you have an extremely limited amount of time to make something and you're trying to make something that doesn't even have to be good. So how do you, if there's something that doesn't want to be fun, how can you make that good? How can you do it best? The first thing to do is to play to your strengths. Different people have different strengths. Some people are very good at one thing, some people are good at a bunch of things. I personally am okay-ish at art, and that plays in absolutely to how I plan these things. I'll always start out drawing the game before I go into anything else. I can program, and therefore I will do programming, but honestly, there isn't enough time to do any kind of serious programming if you want to do something really quick. So I don't particularly play to that one because it doesn't really fit within a short time frame. Bigger than that, I think, is to play to the strengths of your tools. So I work in Unity mostly. Unity has, among its features, an incredibly resilient physics engine that works both in 2D and in 3D. So the starting point for a lot of my games is just let's get some physics objects moving because that takes about 15 seconds to do. And the more you can offload to something your game engine does really well, the more you can make in a very short amount of time. Other examples would be Unity has an extremely powerful animation system. Using Unity animations, you can make bouncy animations really easily. You can actually animate all kinds of properties in Unity, so you can tie all kinds of gameplay numbers and variables onto an animation and hack your way around things there. Game Maker Studio, another popular game engine. Really, really good 2D frame-by-frame animation stuff, if you happen to want that. Really, really quick to get running collision detection, which I really miss every time I have to use Unity. So know what tools you're using, know what they do well. Actually, I didn't even talk about the non-code game development systems. Like Twine is incredibly powerful if you happen to be very good at writing or very interested in writing. You don't even have to be good. Again, these games have to be fun. So if you only want to write things, you can just pull up Twine. You can even draw some doodles. PuzzleScript is a very good one if you happen to just want to make some game mechanics. You should always just pick a tool that you want to play with on the basis of I want to play with this, and then just lean in as heavily and let the engine do as much work as it can. But also don't think about it too much. I mentioned before how often you end up making something that is entirely not what you were planning on making. If you're making a game in an hour, and I deeply love 1 hour game jams as a way to do this, then you should very much let the process lead you. So sometimes you'll just find yourself in a situation where, oh hey, I I have 30 minutes before I should stop this. I don't have a score system. Well, fine, you don't need a score system. Ignore the score system. Find a way to redesign what you're doing such that it doesn't include a score system. Maybe suddenly success or failure is binary condition. If you get to the finish, you win, and maybe you add a timer at the top because all you want to do is encourage people to finish a game faster. Adding a timer and a restart button into a game will often just instantly turn it into a game where people can just restart and try and beat it as quickly as possible, and then you can have all kinds of really simple concepts. That's the word. That's English. You can have simple concepts that you can just repeatedly execute. Like, here's another example of a game. This one's called Power Nap. This is a game where you just pick up your character. It uses Unity physics, which are very good. You just throw them into bed, and then all these sheep appear, and then you throw the sheep over the fence. Maybe I wanted to have some sort of mechanics around that, but really in the end I just like slapped a timer on and a restart button, and it just became how quickly can you go to sleep. Ultimately though, it's a question of practicing and optimizing how you make games to what you are best at. I mentioned before, play to your strengths. I'll talk you through how I generally go about making games if I want to make a small, quick, dirty thing. Because I have some kind of artistic merit, then I'll generally start by, I get given a theme, because I love starting with a theme. I'll walk around for 5 minutes and make a cup of tea, at which point I will usually have an elevator pitch of the game. So just a one-sentence description of the game. No real idea of mechanics, just a simple description of the game. Such as, in this example, I can't remember what, I think the theme was just running. And I just decided, why not a game where you go for a run by typing the letters R-U-N repeatedly. So I sat down and I drew this out here. I genuinely don't know if this is a screenshot of the game or if it's the concept art, because that is actually how I work. I'll sit down, I'll draw a concept art panel for it that has all the graphics the game will ever need in it. And it's meant to be like a living screenshot of the game. I can then just grab all the art assets I did for that, throw it into Unity, kind of put them vaguely in the correct place to make the screenshot I have, throw a few small animations on, and then at that point it's just, because I've had time to think about while drawing what the game might do mechanically, I can then have a decent idea of the like 5 or 10 minutes of code that will generally be needed to make such a simple concept. And then you can just throw on like a restart button and a score system. And Unity is very good, actually. I forgot to mention this earlier. If you work in Unity, Unity has a very good system for going with the process as such, which is, there's this whole Unity feature called Unity Events, where you can just create in code. This may not make sense to non-programmers, but you can just throw this class called a Unity event onto something, and let's say your Unity event is for on-game finish, and you can just, whenever your game timer runs out, say, invoke this on-run finish. And then in the inspector for Unity, it will expose this little field where you can just enter all kinds of, you can execute essentially arbitrary code from there, which means you can say while you're programming, I don't know what I'm going to do when the timer ends, I'll just run this on timer end event. And then afterwards, when you're finishing up the game, you can say, okay, on the timer end, I'll just show a game over screen. There's a piece of UI that says the game is over, and I'll just flick that on the moment the game ends. So you can very much push your decisions downstream, which is really handy when you don't want to be thinking much. So what are these tiny games good for? I've got my slide where I said, what are these good for? But what are tiny games really good for? I've got here a screenshot of a game called Spacebar. Spacebar is a game about mixing drinks in space. You have several drinks, they have little physicsy objects, and you try and mix them up into a mug together, except there is no gravity and no friction because you're in the vacuum of space. Spacebar is a game I first tried making about 6 years ago now with a then member of Warwick Game Design. I didn't know enough about physics in game engines at the time, and I completely bashed my head against Game Maker's physics trying to get it to work, and it didn't work. Tried again a year later, in Unity this time, because I'd only just started picking up Unity then. I then didn't have a good enough understanding of Unity's physics system, so I bashed my head against it and it didn't work. And this game became kind of like the bane of my existence, this concept, because I always wanted to make it, and could never successfully make it until at some point a few months back, I just doing a 1 hour game jam. The theme popped up, something like space, and I just told one of my friends who I was on a call with, I'm going to make this game that I've always tried to make. It's going to be garbage because I'm going to make it in an hour, and I'm going to be happy with it because I will finally put this ghost to rest. And sure enough, the game was finished. It wasn't great. It was by no means what it could have been. But suddenly, the idea was gone. We all have like a billion ideas constantly for the games we could be making. You know, we have the infamous idea person that just wants to come up with ideas. We all have an idea person in us. They have a bazillion ideas. And really tiny game jams are a great way to put them to rest in a way that saves you from actually having to do the months and months and months of working to make a good version of the game. You can just make a really stupid version, feel self-satisfied, and go on with your life, never having to worry about that again. Tiny games are a really good way of failing safely. So there's this peculiar anxiety that you see a lot in people who are drawn to game dev, which manifests in, if I try something and I fail, I will be sad. Therefore, I will never try. This plagued me all the way through my university career, where I just repeatedly refused to try on exams until the point where I almost failed out of university. So I don't recommend that. But the fact of the matter remains that trying and failing is very scary. However, the best way to fail safely is to try in a way with absolutely no risks. Game jams are usually good for this, but if I mentioned before, there's these game jams where you're trying to make a prototype that you might sell for money, you're trying to make something that you might build into something bigger. This immediately adds consequences to failure. If you're doing a game jam where there's a prize at the end, which exists, then suddenly not winning is a consequence of not doing your best. Tiny games are really good because the consequences of failure, because sometimes if you go into a 2 hour game jam and you just make something garbage, sometimes it's just garbage. Sometimes you make a game where there's a random inexplicable bug that causes the game to crash randomly, and you haven't had the brilliant idea to say that that's the win condition. But let's say you do make a terrible game. What have you lost if you spent 2 hours on it? You've lost 2 hours, and for some people that is actually a lot, but for most students especially, 2 hours of your evening is not much. You would just spend it on... I would just spend that time on Twitter, scrolling and feeling sad, and I would much rather spend it making a game that I'm not proud of. The other biggest risk of doing something like this is the whole, what if I try and it's not good, and suddenly I've done my best, and my best, it turns out, is not very good. Well, the great news for the tiny game is you can just say, I was expecting to be rubbish. No one has any expectations when you make a game in 2 hours. You can make any garbage. People are just surprised you finished anything. So we're always proud of anything that you've made there, and it's a lot easier. It's not, it's not impossible to feel bad about having made something bad in a short jam, but it's so much easier than any other context I've ever come across to just make something and not have to worry about it being bad. Tiny games are really good for self-expression. So part of the neatness about a game jam where you just sit down and the game is finished the moment you end, is you have a cohesive mindset. So normally with big professional games and stuff, you have to have design pillars and someone who keeps the game's vision in their heart all the time. But when you're making a small game like this, your mindset doesn't really change much from start to finish. So the cohesive vision is whatever the hell was in your head when you started making it and when you finished making it. And this can mean not only do you have something very cohesive, but it can really capture whatever you were thinking at the time of making it. I have here a screenshot of a game. This isn't quite one I made for a tiny game jam. This is I think this is a global game jam. Nevertheless, it illustrates my point, so I'm going to pretend it's something it wasn't. This is a game made about a long distance relationship I was in. And I just felt particularly bad at the time I was making it about, I just felt sad because long distance relationships are sad. And it's very hard to put into words a lot of the things I was thinking. But thankfully, I was making a video game. And the video game, just because I was in this one cohesive mindset while doing all the design work for it, everything out, I did most of the work in the first evening, and the rest was just like polish and making nicer sprites and stuff. But most of the design of the game is this very coherent capturing of what I was thinking, all my thoughts about long distance relationships. And it captured a lot that I didn't even realize I thought at the time. These small games can be really good for capturing your self-expression in a way that you hadn't necessarily anticipated. Which takes me on to the next slide. Yeah, there we go. Self-discovery. Tiny games can be really good for like realizing bits about yourself that you hadn't actually thought about before. I may have mentioned before that these games are not necessarily fun to play. A lot of the fun is in creation. In fact, I think a lot of tiny games in general is just it's about the creation more than the game itself. I have here another screenshot of a game. This one's called I'm a Terrible Person. It's a game I made when I was dealing with big social anxiety because I'd just been to a nice big games event and I talked to all kinds of cool games industry people who were so scary, and I just felt like such a weird imposter around them all. A feeling that, by the way, never goes away at any point in your career, ever. It's with you forever. But at the time, it was still kind of new to me, so I just like made a game about my social anxiety, and it's yeah, I know, big artsy fartsy whatevers. It helped me understand through making it a lot of the things I was grappling with, because I'm bad at expressing myself verbally a lot of the time. But games is something I'm more familiar with, and it seems really like artsy fartsy again. Like if you have your blues musician who's just sitting there like, oh yeah, I talk through my guitar. My guitar does all the speaking because it understands me. But like, I've spent a lot more time thinking about game design than I've ever thought about, how do I speak? And I can communicate things in a much better way than my scattered brain can through video games. So I can understand myself a lot better if I just drop my thoughts down on paper. Tiny games are also just really good for having a quick yell about something you like or you care about a lot. I think it's quite comparable to doodling. So artists get to doodle, musicians get to make these fun little sketches, we get to make tiny games. And maybe you just really think hedgehogs are neat. This is a game by Sean Wall, who I believe is local to your area, and you may have met him if you go to Checkpoint, which happened back in the days where you could meet people in the real world, but it's a cool Leamington meetup. But he made a neat bitsy game about hedgehogs. He just talked about hedgehogs. You could learn about what they do. Describes it as an educational game. It's just neat. You get to learn about hedgehogs and you can feel the passion from this game about hedgehogs. I love it. There's another game from someone who I hold a great deal of respect for, but I didn't ask if I could include their game, so I've not put their name. This is a game called Know Your Rights, which is just about being at a protest and you get confronted by the police. And it's just, I believe it's made in Ren'Py. It's a visual novel where you can just explore various conversational routes as to what you can do when confronted at a riot, and therefore, if you choose certain options, whether you would be in the legal right to do this, whether someone is violating your own rights. It's a good game for just talking about things that you care about and sharing them with other people. There is a question. I'm going to cover questions at the end of the talk just so that I can have a neat moment to do it. Oh yeah, and this is the other great thing about making tiny games. Your portfolio gets really big. So you'll find when people are looking to hire junior roles for jobs, they're like, how many games have you made? And a lot of students, would you believe it, have actually never finished a single game. Whereas if you make a tiny thing in like an hour, you can do that. You could very comfortably do that like once every 2 weeks, especially if you can find a pace at which it relaxes you. And then suddenly this here, this wonderful lopsided image, this is something I'm really proud of. It's a screenshot of the scroll bar on my itch page, because there's just so much random junk that I've made over the years. And it makes me happy to have so many things that I can put in a portfolio. But I did also say at the start that I was going to talk about making money off these, and so I'm going to talk about how you can weaponize the wonders of this for the financial gains you need to survive in a modern society. Woohoo. So, people like to look at Sock Pop Collective, who are this wonderful group of 4 Dutch indie developers who just make small games. They release 2 every month. You can subscribe to their Patreon and you can get those games for free. Well, not for free, for the £3 monthly fee. You can get both. They're very imaginative games. They're very cool games. It's very easy to look at someone like Sock Pop and think, wow, there must be a decent amount of money you can make by just regularly making and releasing other games. For those of you who are listening, who were in earlier when I was saying you want to remove all pressure of failure from you, you can probably see the biggest problem with this. But the second biggest problem with it is that Sock Pop is a massive outlier that make very good. They're extremely good at what they do. And also, there's a bunch of incredibly capable people who make barely anything on Patreon with the same kind of model. So I just took a screenshot of kept anonymous because I don't want to diss them, but these are the patrons are 3 different people who I hold an immense amount of respect for, and this is not enough to survive. This is something you can do to supplement your income maybe, but this £15 a month is the person who gets this is one of my all-time favourite game creators, and £15 a month is not going to sustain you. Also, as I said, you shouldn't be setting yourself up to a situation where you require your success in a tiny game. So what does it give you? It gives you job opportunities. That's the real where the money is in the games industry, is not running your own studios and stuff, but it's getting jobs helping people make their other stuff, getting the experience working with cool people. And the hardest part about the games industry is getting your foot in the door, getting your first job. So tiny games can actually be really helpful in getting your first games industry job. I am heavily biased because mine are absolutely the reason I am where I am today. I mentioned earlier this, and I've got this racing to the finish again line on my slide because I blatantly forgot to mention one of the most important things in tiny games in my earlier moment. When you're making a tiny game, it is, if you're working in a 2-hour game jam or a 1-hour game jam, again, I love 1-hour game jams, you get this weird thing where from the moment you have started making the game, you are in, oh god, the end is nigh stage. Now, if you talk to game developers and ask them about what's the hard part of game development, it turns out it's that bit where you finish a game. But if you start a game and finish it within an hour, you have started off in that most difficult part, that part that people are constantly telling you that you don't have, is the difficult bit of game development. This is why when you're looking to hire entry-level positions, you so often look for people who have finished games, not people who have, and my apologies if this is calling anyone in the talk out, but there is this habit in students of starting a game, you work on it for about 4 months, hell, sometimes you work on it for 3 years, and then you never finish it. And that is actually a big red flag, because the inability to finish projects is one of those things that is really worrying. And it takes some work to be able to finish a project. And if you can make lots of tiny games, if you can get your portfolio to have a scroll bar, then you've absolutely demonstrated that you know when to say that something is finished. There's saying, I can't remember what it is, games are never finished, they're abandoned. Nobody is ever happy with the state of their game when they release it. Maybe those indies you see who spent 7 years working on something are the exception, but generally, no games are released when someone's happy with it. And if you can go to a tiny game where you will never be happy with the final product, that sweet release of making a game where you're guaranteed to not be happy with with what you finish off with, then yeah, you'll finish so many games. You'll also just get a wreath of experiences just working with tiny little aspects of your toolkit. I'm going to go back to this screenshot. These are just some random things I've done. None of these took me a particularly large amount of time, but they all let me touch on a different part of Unity's functionality. Different. 3 of them use the Unity physics system. But this game, for example, allowed me. This is a game where you have these little pieces of paper that pop up for you, and you draw with a little pen your answer on it. And that was really good for me practicing how in Unity you can just do a little MS Paint style interaction. And it was a game built around that. And the thing about having all these experiences very quickly, here we go, is that when someone asks you, have you ever done X in a job interview? You don't have to have done it 50 times to talk about it. You need to have done it once. And suddenly you can talk about that one time you did it. And if you do lots and lots of small games, you have this massive breadth of experience that you can draw from to talk about. You can answer so many left field questions by just having tried so many different things. Oh yeah, that's exactly what I just said. Making tiny games is also very useful because they can keep you sane. I've got here a comparison of two games that I made at around the same time. So this was I believe April 2017 for the game on the right and June 2017. This game, Snexgun, is a game that I was making while I was working my first job that made me very sad, and I desperately wanted to make a game that would make me money so that I could get into the games industry, break through the barrier, etc., etc. So I made this mobile game. It had ads in it. I even got to go to some pitching event because they accepted me as a finalist, and I was like, wow, isn't this cool? It has neat art. Kind of happy with what it is, but ultimately, it burned me out hard. I was not even in the games industry. I had no professional experience in the games industry. It's very hard to make a commercial game by yourself, and you will just crash yourself against the rocks. Contrast that with this game on the right. I mentioned it before, I'm a Terrible Person. It's a game I made in 8 hours at the end of this fun festival called Amaze that was in Berlin. And I just made it because it was fun. It's what I wanted to make. And ultimately, the screenshot is not of the game. It's of this article that was originally published in Kotaku UK after I was interviewed by the incredible journalist Laura Kate Dale. That article happened just before my first games job interview that was successful. It was brought up in that games job interview. This game that was covered in it was discussed in my interview and was later cited as one of the reasons I stood out from the other candidates and got that job. Now, to be upfront, the job I worked for was a small artsy indie company that had they made a game called Cultist Simulator that was very wild and out there and weird, and they were looking for people who were making weird out there stuff. They liked what I did with the UI in this game. But if you're working for a more commercial company, they may be interested in experience having monetized things. But the fact of the matter is, at one point in my life, I quit the job that I had when I made Snexgun. I started a new job. This was at a VR agency. I enjoyed the job, so I suddenly felt a lot less need to make commercial things. I accepted that if I never got a job in the games industry, I would be totally fine with that. And I started making these tiny games because that's what I actually liked doing. Far more than trying to ham-fist my way into making money off games. So I just suddenly, this was in 2018, I just made, I think 25 games that year? There was a lot of games that year. And would you believe it, that's what gave me the energy to make lots more interesting things. I'm suddenly winning awards at game jams, things that were never happening before. And then I got my first job in the games industry off the back of this momentum I got through actually making games because I liked it, as opposed to out of some kind of upsetting but sometimes necessary need to profit off my games. Also, it can let you recover. Burnout is incredibly common in a lot of the world, especially in our current day and age. And it's really weird when you tell people that, hey, actually, I do these 1-hour game jams at the weekend if I need to recover, if I'm feeling tired. It's so weird for people, the idea that you can get tired and recover by doing a game jam. But for me, it's like having a nice warm bath. It's something you do at the end of a stressful week. And part of it is because you can get this very quick, very cheap feeling of self-validation. So this here is a screenshot from a friend who I convinced to do this recently. They struggle a lot finishing games sometimes, as does everyone. To be fair, they're pretty good at it actually, but finishing games is a struggle. And to have suddenly this shot, this adrenaline shot from finishing something, from putting it out there, from feeling accomplished, that can revitalize you so much. And that's sometimes just an activity you can do to feel good about yourself. So yeah, tiny games. They're cool. They're neat. They can get you a lot of cool things. I highly recommend it. Also, it's just fun. Anyway, questions. There's a couple in chat, but if anyone has any, I don't know like what policy is with voice stuff. I'll just answer Josh's questions quick, and then people can unmute if they have questions. So Joshua asked, what do you do when you can't make art and your tiny game looks pants? Well, I have great news for you on that front. It really doesn't matter if your game is garbage. Like, I'm a bad example because a lot of my games look semi-coherent. But if I go to 1hourgamejam.com, am I still screen sharing? Can someone confirm for me real quick that I'm screen sharing my browser view?
Yeah, I can see your browser.
Excellent. So this is 1hourgamejam.com. They run a game jam every week. They make a lot of games that do not look particularly good. And you know what? They still get all the benefits. It's still really interesting ideas, really wild ideas, quick validation, and just beautifully chaotic. There is nothing wrong with having a game that does not look good. Right? I don't want to like criticize these games art, but like, you make a game in an hour and you're not an artist, it's totally fine to make a game that doesn't look great, and that doesn't matter. Part of the appeal is making something that is garbage and that you can be proud of. Like, I had previously like a screenshot of this. Where did I have it? This game where the game that whenever it crashes, that's when the game ends. The person who made that was so proud of that janky, messy, disgusting mechanic. There is real pride to be had in making something that is garbage and saying, this is me, I am this garbage, I'm proud of it. I'm so proud of having made a game where you can flip an omelette and there is no gameplay you can do. It's not fun. I love that. I love that I've made a not fun game, and I love the power of being proud of that. The reason Sock Pop worked over... Yeah, so what's the reason Sock Pop as a games collective worked over others? Why is the reason that they get £4,100 a month and many other incredibly capable creators do not? They are entirely... They're a business in a sense. They're entirely catering to this idea of let's make lots of very shockingly high quality games within a small amount of time. So they're 4 people. They get 2 months each to make a game. They work on this full time now. They try and make the best, most imaginative wild game they can within 2 months. And then through huge effort and community building, like they've worked so hard to build this large following they have, to put themselves out there, then they've gotten to where they are. It's a lot of work, it takes a bit of luck, and it takes a lot of ability to achieve what they've done. It's like when we look at rock stars and think, wow, how did they succeed? Except with a bit less nepotism. I don't think Sock Pop did it with quite as much nepotism as most, but that's music industry controversy stuff. Let's not get into that. Questions? Any others? Where do you suggest posting getting feedback? That is a really good question. So if you do happen to do these 1 hour game jams, which I so deeply recommend, then I'm a big fan of that. I do think it's important to find community where you can put out games. Like there will be some people out there who are just not keyed into like how to give nice feedback and stuff. And I think it's important to give yourself space where you can put out something that you know is garbage and that is objectively not the best, and people will get excited for the fact that you're excited. So for me, that is spaces like Warwick Game Design. If I believe the space as I know it is one where you can proudly present something that isn't great and have people get excited with you. I also recommend just posting your games on itch, so itch.io. Like, it's free hosting. Just dump absolutely everything you make onto this wonderful website, because also it's just like, it's a nice preservation of history. You can see, like, can I just go to my page? Like, you can just see all the garbage things I've made here. Look at the scroll bar. Isn't it a great scroll bar? So yeah, I'd recommend posting it to itch and sharing it among your peers and friends who know you well enough that they will not be jerks to you. Like, there's a time for honest, frank, realistic feedback, and you do not want that kind of honest, frank, destructive feedback on something that you've spent 30 minutes making and are proud of how garbage it is. Any further questions? Excellent, yeah, Dan confirming you are chill. Yeah. It's one of the most valuable and often underappreciated things that these spaces do. I'm currently a freelancer. I currently I'm working with Mike Bithell Games, is the current name of it. I'm working on secret stuff because the games industry is NDAs absolutely everywhere. Yeah, Cultist Sim is a bit of an awkward one, and just like to address the elephant in the room, that's a job I had to leave because there were serious allegations, serious and highly credible allegations of sexual misconduct against the founder, tragically. But aside from that, I've worked on the other one that I can talk about comfortably is that isn't NDA'd is the Dark Side Detective. So there's this Dark Side Detective. So it's this retro point and click adventure about being an investigator who looks into paranormal stuff. It's highly, highly comedy based. It's great. I worked on a sequel to it. I didn't work on the first one, but the sequel's coming out soon, and I've worked on that. Usually I do, so I'm a programmer by trade. I do programming, generalist programming for small teams. So that's like wearing all the hats. It's making sure that artists don't lose their minds trying to get their assets into games. It's doing UI, it's doing shaders, it's all that fun stuff. So how do big teams work is actually not a question I can answer because the biggest company I've ever worked at was 20 people, and that one was a company of that was an agency, so that was kind of split into very small people teams that were working on their own projects. So I'm afraid I can't actually answer that one realistically. Very much specialised in indie development. I will have to. Oh no 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 no! Do you feel you work better on games you personally play? I don't think that has a massive impact on my professional work, but I make far better. Get the games I make for fun. I think are far more interesting if they're games I would play because I like games that are silly and not fun to play. And yeah, don't be sorry for questions. May do one more question, but I'll hang around in like chat and stuff afterwards if you want to just like chit chat. Art style is very distinctive, particularly with characters. Do you think it's not only useful to have cohesion with a tiny game, but cohesion between games? So the reason my art style is very distinctive is actually because I just take shortcuts everywhere. So when I do art, the very first thing I do is I go to flatUIcolors.com. I select one of these random color palettes, I copy it, I throw it into my vector art tool, Inkscape, and that's my starting point. The second point I go to is I will very often copy some old art I've done somewhere else because, believe it or not, I will never sue myself for plagiarism. You can just steal your own stuff. So there's a lot of coherentness between my art, but strictly because I generally don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. So it either ends up being like these very this character model I've used so many times with very small variations in so many of my games. Alternatively, it just turns into this like, let's just draw with MS Paint and use those same colors. But it's always stealing from a color palette and copy pasting things between projects, and that is why my art's distinctive. I wouldn't say that that is something that benefits me. It just makes the creation process easier. Like, I want to be clear. Most of these games have never been played by... Like, a lot of them have just never been played by anyone. I don't think anyone's played this game where you can't do anything. I don't do these games. You know, shouldn't go into these games expecting to make it for, like, quality. But I'm rambling. You get what I mean. And yeah, we shall call it there. Thank you everyone for coming, thank you for listening, and thank you for your questions.